You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. I just want to give a quick content warning for listeners up top that this conversation does include mention of suicide and sexual abuse of minors. In 1999, student journalists at Garfield High School in Seattle heard a rumor. It was about a beloved teacher named Tom Hudson. He taught biology, he ran a popular outdoors program, and according to the rumor, he sexually abused students. The journalists broke the news of these allegations for their school newspaper, and chaos unfolded. The reporters faced pressure to step down from the paper. Their schoolmates turned on them. The teacher at the center of this reporting was placed on leave. And just a few months after everything blew up, Mr. Hudson died by suicide. Adults in the Room is a new series from KUOW that explores the questions that went unanswered 27 years ago. Did Mr. Hudson really abuse those students? Or did these young journalists act irresponsibly at the expense of a teacher's life? Isolde Raftery is a managing editor at KUOW, and she's also one of the student journalists who broke the news on these allegations at Garfield 27 years ago. She's the host of Adults in the Room, part of a new audio documentary feed called KUOW Focus. You can find it on your favorite podcast app right now. Isolde, the first episode of the show comes out this week, and I just wanted you to come on the show and sit down and kind of reflect on the themes that you discuss, the exploration that you did in hosting this new show. So thank you very much for agreeing to come on Soundside.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's been more than 2 decades, almost 3 decades since this all happened. Why did you want to look into this for this project, which became Adults in the Room? I mean, this is a painful and difficult period of your life.
I mean, I really didn't want to. My best friend called me in 2020, the heart of the pandemic, and said, I think we should do a podcast about what happened. I think I work at a radio station, so I think she thought, oh, Isolde knows radio. I, at the time, was working on the website. I don't write for radio. I don't have a background in memoir, certainly not narrative podcast. And so I was like, I don't know, how about I write a magazine piece? But Ella insisted, and we started interviewing our classmates, people we knew who would, be friendly to us about what happened, and just tell us their memories. And as we started talking to each other and to our classmates, we realized how little we understood or how little we knew. And there was no collective understanding of what had actually happened. Because right after all these events took place, we all went off to college. It wasn't like we all got to sit around and continue mulling over the events of our senior year. So yeah, why now? I mean, what ultimately happened, like when I came around to the project, after feeling like it would be really painful to go back in time, it was realizing that a lot of the people I was afraid of speaking to, a lot of the people I thought blamed me, were actually victims. And so as I started finding out more about the people who'd been victimized and learning their stories, I suddenly realized we have a really big story to tell. And it's not just this one narrow story of my senior year, but also one of how the adults in our lives, from the school district to the parents, really the parents of the outdoor club, let us down.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of gets to the title itself, Adults in the Room. What does that mean to you?
It means 2 things. So the adults in the room, you could read it to mean the creepy adults in the room who were alone with the kids, alone with us. And also, the people who were the true adults in the room were the kids. And truly all the kids, that really resonated as I did all these interviews. What came out is all of these young people, some of whom I was at odds with, were doing the work of being adults, of being therapists for the actual grown-ups, of helping their classmates, of announcing to classmates that their teacher had died, of reporting sexual abuse. So that's what it means. It's the double entendre.
So people who listen to the show, Adults in the Room, they're going to get a clearer picture of this time at Garfield High School in the late 90s and early aughts. and specifically this teacher, Mr. Hudson, who is accused of inappropriate behavior with students. Can you just briefly describe who is this person and what place did he hold at Garfield High School at that time?
So Mr. Hudson was a giant of a man, literally. He was 6'3". He liked to say that he weighed more than 1/8 of a ton, which is, roughly around 300 pounds. And he had a voice that would just ricochet off the walls. He had this thunderous laugh. He was a prankster. When I was in first period biology, the class he taught, he, during an exam, dropped a tarantula on a kid's desk, and the kid freaked out and he laughed. And this was all under the guise of he's a funny dude. He had a way of kind of making himself always the center. He was the nucleus of everything, of his class, of the club. And so that's who he was. He was larger than life, physically and emotionally.
And that made writing critically about his behavior really difficult for you and other student journalists who decided to tackle these allegations, these rumors. And that's, something that you explore a lot in the show. The show itself is largely about these allegations of sexual misconduct against Mr. Hudson and the fallout of your reporting and other student journalists reporting. But in the first episode, we are really just kind of dropped into the outdoor club and the kind of closeness that club created among students and kind of the inner circle around Mr. Hudson. And you take us on this hiking, backpacking trek up Mount Olympus on the peninsula. And a scary accident happens on this trek. Why did you want to start there with kind of explaining this story, with delving into this story?
The reason I wanted to start on Mount Olympus is that is the moment that all the students say he changed. He went from being a lot easier to get along with to being really moody. They believed maybe he got a concussion up on the mountain when he fell. He fell 30 feet into what is called a moat, or you might call it a crevasse. And he changed. They saw a visible shift in his character. What happened after that is I got assigned to write about the rescue mission as a student journalist. And I learned by calling the ranger station that actually he had made quite a few mistakes and he'd cut corners. And I'd also learned from my dad's colleague, who I happened to bump into at a work party, that there had been other rescues on mountains and that this guy wasn't really known for being very safe. So here he is, an adult on the mountain with kids who may or may not be prepared. And so this story, it's a bit of a gamble to start not with the abuse, but to start with the man himself. And I wanted to showcase who he is and showcase kind of him at a height, like him doing a really cool thing, which is going on an incredibly hard backpacking trip with his students and then bringing it to me. Really, I mean, it sort of intersects with me, the student journalist. So I'm able to come in and introduce myself as well. So that's what we decided to do that. But it is a bit of a gamble because most stories you'd want to start with like the allegations of abuse, and we don't.
Yeah.
In that first episode.
But I think it helps you really understand what happens next, like why there would be so much loyalty to this person among this group of people who did go through these incredible, I mean, this hiking accident, he almost died. The kids could have died going in to rescue him. I mean, this is like a really crazy situation for teenagers to be in. And it really does kind of set the table for, the rest of your narrative. Isolde, I wanted to ask you, when it comes to investigating the facts of a story like this, these are serious allegations against Tom Hudson. To be clear, he didn't go through like a criminal trial, like he hasn't been convicted of a crime. How do you delve into the facts of a story like this? And what kind of roadblocks did you find when you were trying to figure out the truth?
So because Mr. Hudson has died, It's different. It's a different standard. However, we're reporting from records. And I would say this is, if you listen to this, it sounds like a memoir. But I would say behind every fact is probably a record or multiple people who remember it. I don't think there's almost anywhere in here where there's not like a diary entry or a public record or multiple people remembering a thing. So I really applied, and I mean, I'm still fact checking, but I would say I've applied the same
to the later episodes,
to the episodes, not the first ones,
not
right?
ones that are published,
not the ones that are published. Yeah. But I would say we've applied the same journalistic rigor to this as I would to any other investigation. So yeah, it's weird to fact check yourself. And at times I've been like, wait, I was there. I know what happened. But even when it's 27 years ago, you do hope there's a diary that can corroborate what you're saying in present day. Because memory is so flawed. And sometimes it's so sharp. And it's like you can paint a scene, and other times it's just mush. So yeah, we've had to like just look at all the records. And I'd say we have about 1,000 pages of records, something like that.
And I don't want to get ahead of or spoil the podcast or the narrative that you're unspooling here. But is it fair for me to ask, like, did you find an answer about Tom Hudson and whether he really was doing these things that he was rumored to be doing to kids?
Yeah. So I want to say two things about that. One is we absolutely did. And we found out pretty quickly that he had emotionally abused children. He had physically abused children. He had sexually humiliated children. Some of the abuse was prolonged and young teenage boys, physical contact. And so, yes, the answer is yes, we found out what we set out to find out. And I should say, too, like when we set out to actually launch the podcast or really launch the investigation, Ella, my best friend, and I said, oh, we should call this We Were Right. We were so hung up on the idea that the story was about how we had been wronged. That was our focus. And as soon as I started meeting these grown men, really, but they were boys back then, the entire podcast shift for me, like the way I viewed it, it like felt really narcissistic to actually be like, oh, I'm just looking to vindicate myself. Like that's not it at all. We completely changed it to be more looking at like how were all these people let down? And of course, the more you see, the more anecdotes you have and the more people you speak to, suddenly you realize like, oh my gosh, this is something that everybody knew and everybody turned a blind eye to. So that's really how the journey has shifted for me as a journalist. I set out to answer one question and then I realized how wrong that question was.
So in many ways, you thought of it as being a memoir, like you said, because you are at the center of the way this story came to light for people back then. But as you're investigating this as an adult, you realize this is about children and victims and people who are now survivors of abuse. I mean, that's a very difficult road to be navigating when you're doing an investigation like this. I'm curious how your own reporting at the time stands up to how you as an adult are able to, what you as an adult are able to discern about what actually happened. Like, how did you do at the time as a kid reporter, basically, at the Garfield High School newspaper?
So what happened back then is two things happened. One is my best friend essentially wrote an article, and I helped with it, but she's the primary. She and another student primarily wrote this article in which they had an anonymized story about an anonymous teacher and an anonymous kid, and this teacher had made the kid feel weird sexually and then separated himself from the teacher, and there was blowback. Basically, that's the story. So there was very, very little. And it was the kid's direct story. So I actually feel like even commenting on that, it was just so minor. what we really kind of got in trouble for, I guess you could say, or what people really turned on us for, was we then reported it up the chain to authorities. So we did two things. We went to authorities, and there was that anecdote in the student paper, and that may or may not have resulted in this whole thing blowing up. I mean, one of the things I learned as I reported is that I always thought I was the center of this chaos. Really, I was a bit player. There were other people becoming aware of what was going on. There was another teacher who heard something. The principal had heard something. An investigator had heard something. People were aware of things, but it's not like they're informing me that they're aware of it. So, we're all the stars of our own movies. And that became very clear as I reported. I realized, wait, maybe if I hadn't said anything, I would have had, or written anything or whatever, this still probably would have blown up. I don't know if that's true, but I believe it's more true than when I started. I really, truly thought I was the star of this show. And yeah, other people were aware of what was going on.
But that also brings with it, it's not just being, the star. It brings a level of guilt because of what we already talked about, the fact that this teacher, Tom Hudson, died by suicide. Was there a level of relief also in finding out that everything didn't rest on the actions of teenagers, of you when you were a kid?
Huge, huge relief. And I would say that I felt a lot of guilt. And I really did feel that I was culpable to some degree, to a large degree, of a man's death. I thought that I pushed that first domino that ended in him dying by suicide. And that maybe if I hadn't done that, he'd still be alive. What we learned, my best friend and I learned, is that actually his death resulted in other kids feeling safer and feeling relief themselves. So that today, present day, us learning that felt really good. And then learning that other people were aware felt good. That other adults were actually taking this seriously. Yeah, it felt like not everybody had let us down. And I would say that at the start of all this, my husband said to me, "You can do this, but I ask that you have a therapist and that you work through this with a therapist." And he was really worried about my mental health. I can tell you, as I approach the end of production, I feel better about this than I ever would have thought. I really thought it was going to be awful, and that I was really taking a risk, and I'm not. And I've asked others, I've asked a lot of the women involved, because there's a lot of women who have helped get us sources, how they feel. And they were initially pretty anxious, and they all feel really good about it and really empowered, and we actually brought people together, and people are talking about these old wounds, because you worry about re-traumatizing people. The man has died, why go back there? And we all feel like this was the right thing to do. We articulated things that had not been articulated, and we have much more clarity about this old wound. And another thing I learned is a lot of other people felt they were to blame for Mr. Hudson's death. And when I started interviewing people, I'd almost burst out laughing when they'd be like, "I feel guilty." I'd be like, "Wait, you too? How do you also feel guilty? How did so many of us children feel guilty? And by the way, why didn't anyone tell us back then, this has nothing to do with you. You should not feel guilty?"
That's the question that I keep coming to just listening to the first couple episodes. I want to yell, from 27 years in the future, these kids needed more. These kids needed more support. They needed to be protected. They needed to not be alone with a teacher like this, no matter how beloved he was, for extended periods of time, in isolated situations. And also, the kids at the paper needed to be have some arms wrapped around you to say, this is not about you. This is not about what you were writing about. I mean, how do you feel looking back at yourself? What do you wish you could tell your 18, 17-year-old self?
Well, I see very clearly how the school district, Seattle Public Schools, failed us. And failed us in terms of policy. It's very boring and wonky, but basically the school district teacher's contract allows teachers to expunge records every 4 years, and earlier than that, depending on the circumstances. So what you end up with is no paper trail for so many predators. And that means you're actually harboring predators. You go up to the state level and they, the same thing. I mean, there's all these different policies and they're all tangled up in each other, and they make it so that it's a bureaucratic nightmare to report abuse. It's virtually impossible to report abuse and make sure it stays on the books. And so reflecting on all that, I know it's like not what I would tell my younger self, but like that's the activism I would do if I were a mom. If these were my kids, if I were my own daughter, that is what I would do. I'd be kicking down doors and pointing out just how terrible the system is. What I wish I could say to my younger self is, you're not wrong to do this. You're right. They're letting you down. You're very, very brave. And I'd probably give that little girl a big hug. I mean, I don't know. I was a very independent, fierce, stubborn child, but I think I needed to hear that. Certainly. And I also would say, don't listen to those teachers who are making your life miserable. They don't have a moral compass. You do. History will see what you did as the right thing and not them. You're on the right side of history. But it's hard to say that in the moment because you don't actually know.
Yeah. Isolde Raftery is managing editor at KUOW. She's a central voice. She's, both a subject and host of the story in Adults in the Room. It's a new podcast from KUOW. It's part of this feed that's going to have audio documentaries called KUOW Focus. You can find Adults in the Room wherever you get your podcasts. It is a compelling and also incredibly emotional listen. And I just thank you so much for your work, Isolde, and your whole team. Alec Cowan, one of your producers, is here in the studio as well. I know it's been a really big project.
Alec just waved.
Hi, Alec. And I'm just really proud of you guys and also excited for the world to get to hear it.
Thanks so much, Libby. That means so much.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org or on your favorite podcast app.